Good morning, and you're very welcome along to OTB AM. A very happy Wednesday morning to you, and we've got a load to preview on today's show. It's a massive show coming your way because it is a huge weekend coming up, and I'm not just talking about Ireland being back in the Eurovision final. I'm talking about Leinster being in the Champions Cup final. I'm talking about Mayo versus Galway in one of the biggest May matches in Gaelic football in recent years. I'm talking about the conclusion to the Premier League season and, of course, the Players' Championship in the golf. We're going to be previewing all of that between now and around 9:15 this morning in the good company of Dave McIntyre. How are you, Dave?
We're back in the Eurovision final.
We are, yeah. We qualified last night. Ryan O'Shaughnessy is his name, I do believe.
Passed me by completely.
Because you were obviously fixated on a thrilling game in the Premier League last night.
Yes. I did actually watch the game last night. I did watch the Swansea-Southampton game. It was thrilling. Now, it wasn't of the highest quality. I won't lie to our listeners/viewers that didn't see it and tell them that it was a sumptuous display of attacking football from both teams with chances at either end. That was not the case, but it was just so tense. It was a real gritty, almost like an old school third round FA Cup tie in January where every tackle counted. And the sight of, there was a young mother in the stands of the Liberty Stadium, and she had her young son on one knee and her young daughter on the other knee, both of whom were inconsolable. And she was just kissing them on the forehead, and you could just see she was almost just trying to convey the message, look, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. But it's not. Because they're in serious trouble, and these kids couldn't believe that probably a team that they've only ever known as a Premier League team, because these kids were like 6 and 8 maybe, are no longer going to be a Premier League side, barring a big turnaround over the next 5 days, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, because I know we're going to get into that later.
100%. Huddersfield are the team you're mentioning there. Southampton are probably safe. The reason why I'm happy you're in studio this morning, Dave, is because you said something, I think, on the radio show about 2 years ago, at the height of the Tony Pulis era, when, you know, it gets to February and they've already got 40 points and everybody's got their feet up and nothing matters anymore to be a West Brom fan. Now they've been relegated. You made the point that day that you would rather be in a relegation scrap than be meandering around mid-table. Do you stand by that this morning?
I do, absolutely. If it's a season in, season out type of thing, which it kind of was for West Brom. I think this is the end of a 10-year stint in the Premier League. So like, they are an established Premier League side, as are Stoke, and both are gone now. But you can only take mid-table mediocrity for so long, even if that is a state of affairs in which you're clearly punching above your weight, you've no real pedigree or history or right to be one of these mid-table teams. Sooner or later, this is going to set in with Burnley as well, if they continue to produce the sort of displays they have been over the last couple of years, because it just gets boring.
Wait, so you say Burnley are going to fade into mediocrity as well because
well, if
they
Burnley
can't punch
continue
through that
now,
ceiling?
this season is incredible. They're going to be playing in the Europa League next season. That's an astonishing achievement for a club like Burnley. But really, they're probably a bottom six team, a bottom six club. They've got an incredible manager and a group of players at the moment that are just so full of character. And the club as a whole is so full of character. But if they continue to punch above their weight, eventually they're going to settle into this 9th position to 16th position every season, and they've got a manager, if they hold on to him, that's not going to see them relegated, although he has overseen one relegation with the club in the past. But you think he is so experienced now as a Premier League manager that it just becomes a little bit of tedium, and you want the big days. Like, anyone who made that trip from the south coast to the Liberty Stadium last night to watch Southampton play will remember last night. It's one of the biggest wins in the club's recent history. It would rival their cup final defeat to Manchester United last season, when they came so close to winning the first major trophy since the 70s. But if that's the case every year, as has been for West Brom, they haven't really had a relegation scrap for quite some time.
Well, I'm not sure I subscribe to the theory that West Brom fans are waking up this morning delighted with the fact that they've been relegated because they're not finishing 12th.
It only goes as far as the point where you're relegated. And you really do not want to be in that situation. So they've stepped over that line now, and now they are wishing for a bit of mid-table mediocrity. But West Brom need to be careful what they wish for, because you wonder, would they be in this position if Tony Pulis had not been sacked?
Probably not.
And the fans just did not like the style of play, and as soon as the results started to go downhill a little, they wanted him out. Well, they got their wish. They hired arguably one of the worst appointees in Premier League management history, and there's a very good chance that they sacked Pardew a week earlier, they'd be going into this weekend with their fate in their own hands.
So there you go. If you're a West Brom fan and you're watching at home, it is all your fault. That's why you've been relegated. It is definitely your fault. Let me tell you what's coming up on today's show, because I mentioned a huge weekend of sport coming our way. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of pretty much all of it between now and around 9:15 this morning. Coming up in just a couple of moments, we'll be bringing you through the sports pages. We'll be talking about the Premier League, that relegation battle, which involves Huddersfield now in severe danger, actually. If you look at their last two fixtures, they've really been dragged into it. We'll chat about that after the sports pages. pages. We're then going to be looking ahead to Mayo-Galway. We're going to hear from David Clarke, amongst others, from the Galway camp as well, building you up to that huge game on Sunday live from Castlebar, which throws in at 4 o'clock. Leinster-Racing, of course, though, is probably the fixture of the weekend from an Irish perspective. It's on in Bilbao on Saturday evening. Andy Dunne is going to join us in studio to preview that and chat about Stuart Lancaster and Joey Carberry, of course, as well. Two huge themes, really, on the week of a Champions Cup final. And then finally, the Leitrim boys, after their huge win on the Bronx on Sunday evening, we're going to be joined by a couple of their players, hopefully. We understand they're probably in the air right now, but they're going to land in Dublin in the next hour or so, and we will catch up with them on Skype as soon as they touch down on Irish soil once again. But for now, it's time for the back pages.
OTB AM.
In association with Air. Get Air Sport free with Air Broadband.
Let's show you the back page of the Irish Independent this morning. It is a €5 million sponsor boost for the Dubs. Insurance giant extends deal to underline Blues pulling power, which I'm sure will cause a lot of ructions with people who kind of... I don't know, the anti-dub bias, I don't think it is anti-dub bias when you bring up actual figures like this, that I guess it's a 5-year deal with AIG. It's going to be €1 million per year, we understand. We never get the exact figures, but that is a general understanding. And you look at the second highest income when it comes to a yearly sponsorship deal, and it's Cork with Chill Insurance for 420 grand. So there's a huge disparity there, of course, when it comes to the population, and if it is going to grassroots Gaelic games, and it's all well and good, but the rich get richer, Dave.
It's a 25% hike on the last deal, which was signed in 2012, and that just shows where the brand, I know the economy is in a different place now in comparison to where it was in 2012, but it shows where Dublin's brand is in comparison to 2012, because they've since added another 4 All-Irelands on top of the one they won in their Pat Gilroy in 2011. You mentioned that we hope to have a couple of the Leitrim footballers who have chatted in from New York on the show before we sign off this morning. If the numbers are to be believed, their shirt sponsor is drawing about €20,000 a year. It beggars belief, the difference and the chasm between the haves and the have-nots, and it's only going to get worse. The next deal you suspect that Dublin sign will be a bigger one again, and there's no question that AIG are doing very well out of it from a PR point of view, which is why they're willing to play so much money into it. Now, it has to be said, it's not just the senior footballers that they sign up to. They are sponsoring the underage teams. They are sponsoring the women's teams in the county as well. So it's not just all let's get the jersey on the senior footballers, and it does allow Dublin's camogie teams and ladies football teams to enjoy the same sort of facilities and care that the men's teams are getting. But you just wonder how any team can possibly try and cope with that, as well as the fact that we talk about the player pool, the other resources they have, the fact that all of their players are probably no more than an hour max from training on a nightly basis. You throw it all in together and you can see why Dublin are so dominant. Yeah, it paints that dominant picture for sure, and I think it is just worth reiterating that point, that it is a symbiotic relationship. AIG are certainly enjoying this relationship they've had with Dublin over the last couple of years. We'll move on to the Irish Times back page. It is Rugby Central, Gordon Darcy's column leading the way. Leinster's leaders can see this campaign home. He talks about some of the mirror images really between this year's campaign and you talk about 2008 as well, just kind of beating English giants, Harlequins that year, Exeter this year, and of course blowing and taking the reigning champions apart when it comes to Munster and when it comes to the Saracens. So there's a lot of mirror images there that Gordon Darcy points out. It is rugby really dominating the way in the Irish Times, as you would expect it to do over the next couple of days. It is the big fixture on the Irish sporting calendar this weekend. We'll bring you the front page of the Irish Examiner sports section. They're leading with Mayo versus Galway. Locked and loaded. Eoin Sheahan asked the question if Galway will bait Mayo, and he uses that word very carefully. That is the Galway slang right there. Can they bait Mayo? Well, we'll be chatting about it a little bit later on, and we'll hear from both camps before we go off air this morning. The Times Ireland edition then is going with rugby as well, but it's not Leinster, it is with Ulster, because there is a new twist in the Ulster coach standoff. So Gregor Townsend has gone on the record and says Dan McFarland is going nowhere before January, which is the last thing any Ulster fan wants to hear. They want a coach, they want it now, they want some sort of solidity in that camp, which has been in utter carnage over the past 8 months or so. And it seems that Dan McFarland, who is supposed to become their new director of rugby, is not going to be there for the start of the new season if Gregor Townsend is to be believed, but he's contracted until January and he's going to stay in Scotland until then. Yeah, I think overall money talks, and this is probably just some public sabre rattling from Gregor Townsend. I would imagine he's been instructed by the SRU to say such things. you would hope that's the case from an Ulster point of view, and that this is a problem that can be solved by just flinging a little bit of extra cash at it. If Townsend is true to his word and genuinely believes, and he is not being instructed by his employers to say these things publicly, genuinely believes that his contract is his contract and McFarlane will be there until January, well, it's another absolute disaster from an Ulster point of view. McFarlane needs to be in Ravenhill next month. This rebuilding process, and let's face it, it is a rebuilding process. They have to start from the very bottom, given where they're coming from at the moment. They still have a Champions Cup playoff that they have to win. This could get worse, a lot worse, before it gets better if they don't win their next game. But for McFarlane not to be coming until January, that's essentially next season written off. What if whoever the interim head coach happens to be does a really good job and pulls up trees? Next of all, McFarlane comes in and he just gets shunted aside and the whole thing is thrown into a little more uncertainty again. We've seen Munster handle that transitional period between two different coaches mid-season very well this season, but I would imagine they're the exception to the rule and not the norm, because...
Well, let's face it, that was a 3-4 week gap. This is going to be half a season.
Yeah.
So it is an absolute nightmare, and as you say...
And they had Erasmus in place.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were coachless for that time. Erasmus was not an interim head coach. So they knew that when Van Graan came in, there would be only a 4-week handover period, and they managed that period as best they could. Ulster are not in that position, and it's just another really difficult headline for Ulster rugby fans to stomach this morning on the back of what is essentially the biggest game they will play this season, or ahead of what's the biggest game they'll play this season. They lose that and they're gone.
Was it a similar situation with Les Kiss, that it took him a couple of months to actually get into the hot seat because of some sort of negotiations with the IRFU, if I recall correctly? I might look into that and bring that up again.
Yeah, well, it certainly wasn't what they're going to have to deal with this time around if Scottish Rugby Union stick to their guns and refuse to let him leave but before January. But more often than not, these things are sorted by a little bit of extra wedge.
Let's show you the front page, or the back page rather, of the Irish News this morning. It is Ulster GAA all the way. Hart says sanction would be harsh. That's on the training regime, and the 10-day rule is silly, he says. Kavanagh in balance for Farney clash. So that's Colin Kavanagh, who may or may not be playing. His fitness is still under question marks. Also, we are Ulster contenders, declares Declan Bonner, and it's not exactly the biggest statement in the world. If you're the manager of Donegal, what is it, 6 years on from winning an All-Ireland, you better be saying you're Ulster contenders. Otherwise, that's a pretty defeatist attitude right away.
Yeah, if Declan Bonner's coming out publicly and saying, you know what, we've no chance of lifting the Anglo-Celt Cup in a few weeks' time, I don't think his players or his management team or the supporters up in Donegal would take to that too kindly. And they do have a difficult opener in Ballybuffet, although it's a place they haven't been beaten in the Championship for the best part of 8 years. They are taking on a Cavan side that are now a Division 1 team, so that's certainly no gimme. But they get through that and they get into the competition proper, yeah, they have a chance. They don't have to take on Tyrone or Monaghan in their second game, so they should have a really good opportunity.
Absolutely they do. Let's show you the back page of the Racing Post this morning. They're going with tonight's game in the Premier League, which has actually turned out to be a huge fixture. It's Chelsea versus Huddersfield at 7:45, and the headline is everything to play for, which is literally the case. Stamford Bridge battle could have an impact at both ends of the table. Of course, Huddersfield only 3 points clear now at the bottom of the Premier League table, but they play Arsenal on Sunday. They've only got, I think, a 3-goal difference on the bottom three on Swansea, who play Stoke on Sunday, of course. So you'd imagine Chelsea, who are chasing top 4 and are really hot on the heels of Liverpool right now, are going to go gung-ho at Stamford Bridge tonight, probably win that game. Huddersfield then, they go back towards the goal difference, maybe 1 or 2 goals clear of Swansea. Swansea play Stoke, and Huddersfield play Arsenal in Arsene Wenger's last ever game. I don't know about you, but I'm looking at Huddersfield right now and I'm thinking you're going to get relegated.
Well, you wouldn't have them as favourites for relegation ahead of Swansea, surely.
I don't know. Like, I mean, there's also the pride thing with Stoke City, of course, but like it's going to be their last game in the Premier League for who knows. But I think Huddersfield are going down. I've just got this feeling that Swansea are going to do the business at the weekend.
Well, Swansea haven't scored in 4 games. They've got 2 in their last 9.
That's a problem, all right, yeah.
But they need to score in order to beat Stoke at the weekend. And having watched them last night, I don't know where those goals are going to come from. Although Tammy Abraham had a pretty good impact when he came off the bench and had 1 or 2 half chances. But if I would prefer to be in Huddersfield shoes, despite the fact that they have to play 2 of the more recognised sides in the Premier League, but they need a single point. And if you can't get a point at home to Arsenal, who have nothing to play for in your final game...
Well, they've got to play for the pride of Arsene Wenger.
They haven't shown much pride for Arsene Wenger in the last 2 or 3 years, have they, these players?
But Arsenal are the best club ever at kind of getting themselves up for something meaningless. And going to Huddersfield on the final day of the season is completely meaningless, and it will be so Arsenal for them to actually hammer them.
I agree that Huddersfield's position is precarious, but of the 2, I would prefer to be in Huddersfield's shoes.
Always take the points. Always take the points, as they say. What have you got? You're leading with the Herald, I think.
I'm going to start with the Herald. It's about Manchester United and Jose Mourinho looking for a swap deal, apparently. We are now getting into silly season in terms of the transfer window reopening and some of the transfer rumours that we'll have to stomach over the next few weeks and months. United boss wants to offload Martial and bring in Willian. His comments on Martial after the defeat to Brighton on Friday were pretty scathing, and he is a big fan of Willian, who probably hasn't seen as much game time in terms of the starting 11 for Chelsea this season as most people would have anticipated. And then another mention of the €5 million boost for the Dubs as AIG sign on for 5 more years. That is a lot of cash being in and around Dublin football. In the Mirror this morning, it's about Tottenham, actually. This is sort of one of the games we haven't really mentioned as being of large significance going into the final days of the Premier League season. Do or die, Pochettino urges his Spurs stars to give their all in their battle to make the Champions League and keep the club moving forward. They have a couple of home games and they just need to do the business to make sure they finish top 4. But the money would be on Liverpool dropping out of the top 4 than Tottenham if things go the way Chelsea hope they go over the coming days.
What would your assessment of Spurs' season be? Like, it's not exactly, if you go back, 5 months or so, to how glorious it was looking. Say, if you take after the first leg of Juventus, things were looking pretty good at that point. Take it after Real Madrid in the group stage of the Champions League, things were looking amazing. And it's just kind of like, what is the exact step forward they've taken? Okay, beating Real Madrid is a step forward for sure, but what is the tangible thing here that in 12 months' time, when the Harry Kane and Dele Alli question and potentially the Christian Eriksen question comes up, because I think they've got 1 year of grace there, they've really got to do something big next year.
Well, they need to win at Wembley on Saturday week. If they win the FA Cup final, they were beaten by Manchester United in the semi-final. So I'm in the camp whereby I feel Pochettino gets too much credit for what Tottenham have done over the last 3 or 4 years. Yes, they were brilliant in the Champions League this season, but when it really came to the crunch, they weren't able to get the job done. They were in a great position in the tie going into the last half an hour of that second leg against Juventus. Another massive game at Wembley against Manchester United, and despite taking the lead, they can't manage to hold on to that. So it's another big Wembley defeat. And for me, it's been a bang average season. They are no closer to winning the title than they were when they got to the closest point of it the year Leicester won the championship. And they're still in a position where they're worried about the future of the likes of Ali and Eriksen and Harry Kane. So I think Tottenham's season this season has not been good enough.
There's no chance they leave this summer, is there? I think they get 1 more year, personally. And then it's next summer, unless they've made some of the step forwards that we've just been talking about. I can just hear them saying, listen, first of all, about more money. And second of all, Harry Kane is a man of ambition. He's not a man of finance. And he's going to say, I actually want trophies more than anything.
Yeah, I think the 3 of those will be there next season. I think Harry Kane in particular will want to spend at least 1 season at the new White Hart Lane. After that, all bets are off, particularly if they don't pull up any trees next season. Plus, despite the fact that he hasn't won anything as a manager and he's at a club that hasn't won anything in 10 years, there are still calls for Pochettino to be signed up by some of the biggest clubs in Europe. If that continues, eventually he's going to leave. If he doesn't get a lot of money this summer to spend on new players, which I don't think he will because they have this stadium to pay for, there could be a lot of change in and around Tottenham in the next 9 to 12 months. Losing their biggest players, maybe losing their manager.
Like, in 12 months' time, you could be talking about Harry Kane leaving Spurs, you could be talking about Christian Eriksen leaving Spurs, Ali leaving Spurs, but also, as on the back of the Irish Daily Star this morning, Pep Guardiola potentially could be a transfer saga next summer.
Yeah, City sweat on Pep. He's being a bit coy as to whether or not he's going to put pen to paper on a new long-term deal at the Etihad Stadium. He's refusing to commit his long-term future to the Premier League champions. But again, maybe that's just the way you play the negotiating game. Don't tell people that you're desperate to stay, because that might just weaken your hand when it comes to the amount of zeros that might be on the end of your weekly pay packet. Sun Sport, bright spark. A lot of the talk in the build-up of the game last night was that Mark Hughes is going to make history and become the first Premier League manager to relegate 2 clubs in the same campaign. Well, he's managed to sidestep that landmine. Saints alive, Swans on the brink, and Baggies go down. So that win for Southampton last night relegates West Brom. It pretty much leaves it between Huddersfield and Swansea. Only an absolute cataclysmic turnaround this weekend will see Southampton get relegated. And Roos SA, I mean, it's a difficult one to get your head around, that particular...
It's not really.
Well,
it's Rooney going to America, so Roo SA.
Yeah, but it's the full... I don't think we need the full stops in there. And the other thing about the headline is he may not be able to pick it up on the camera. They have superimposed the stars and stripes onto the headline. So Roo SA, I'll give you that one. I'm just a bit slow on the uptake this morning. 12 million switch to DC United. Now, there was talk he was going to go to China. I don't think anyone ever really believed he would go to China before the Everton move. This is a little more up his street, I would have thought. I think culturally, I'm not sure Wayne Rooney would have been suited to the Chinese way of life.
That's our tab of the morning to you this morning, RUSA.
RUSA. It's getting better the more times I say it to myself. Guardian this morning is the final one for me. Obviously, the big story is Gabbiadini's winner against Swansea last night. Manolo Gabbiadini coming off the bench. A lot of credit to Mark Hughes for that. We might mention it later, but they had to make a change at the back. They lost their Polish central defender, Bednarek, and he opted to bring Manolo Gabbiadini on, which meant he had 3 centre forwards on the pitch, and Shane Long as well, and Charlie Austin could easily just brought a defender on, and he pops up and gets the winner. And exclusive former Chelsea players come forward to back racism claim. 2 white members of the club's 80s youth setup have spoken out in support of allegations that the coach Gwyn Williams was guilty of horrific racial abuse. Just the latest instalment in that story that Daniel Taylor is compiling this week in The Guardian. Yeah,
before we get into kind of more on the football and more on Stoke, the big news really this morning and the big news over the last 24 hours is that these guys are back. The Underdogs are making their return to Irish television. TG Cahir are bringing it out of the grave and bringing it back to our screens, which is something we've all desperately wanted since I think it was 2004 was the last season of the Underdogs, when we had the likes of Kieran Donaghy, who almost made his name there. There he is, wearing the Kerry jersey rather than the Underdogs jersey at that point. They're looking for participants. So, Dave, if you've got any friends out in Castleknock who haven't quite made the grade with Dublin, but you feel that they've got a bit of vengeance in their hearts and want to play, this is the team from 2004. So you've got the Underdogs versus Kerry, and you look at that Kerry team, and it's actually a very, very strong team. You obviously have the Gooch in there, you've got Owen Brosnan in there, you've got Sean O'Sullivan in there, Tom O'Sullivan in there, Dermot Murphy in goals, Paul Greedy. That is no Kerry team just thrown out to make up the numbers. Mark O'Shea off the bench, Dennis Dwyer, I think that might be there as well, even though it's 2004. And that Underdogs team, if you look through that, a couple of names there which will stick out. Pierce O'Neill, another one, not just Kieran Donaghy. Despite the fact that Kieran Donaghy is spelled with a K, not a C, whoever wrote that in the Underdogs there. Other than that, I'm not quite sure. Oh, Owen Bradley.
You've got Owen Bradley, you've got Paul Brady from Cavan,
the
world handball champion who spent several seasons playing senior football for Cavan. That's about it though, isn't it? Looking through them, I don't see anybody else that stands out. Stephen Wallace, the Offaly manager, that's one of the same.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to look for any further than our producer's box if we're looking for a candidate potentially for the new Underdog series, because
he's literally pointing to himself in the box right now saying, pick me, pick me, pick me. His name is Tommy Rooney, Underdogs producers, and I'll send you your email if you just drop me a DM on Twitter. It's like, this is the greatest nostalgia week ever. You've got Mark Williams winning the World Snooker Championship. You've got the Underdogs back, all in the space of like 48 hours. I feel like I'm whatever age I was again. It's amazing.
But you were a child when the Underdogs
had this conversation. Did you watch the snooker at the weekend, actually? I wanted to get your take on this.
I watched 2 frames of the entire championship and then I fell asleep. So I think I watched Higgins make it 15-14, and just as it was reaching its pinnacle and its zenith in terms of the tension and the drama, I decided I'd seen enough.
Why would you do that? I mean,
it's a simple answer. Regardless of what happened in the snooker, I was up at 6 a.m. no matter who was around, because I'm generally up at that hour anyhow, because that's when the lads awake. So there's a reason for me going to bed, no matter how dramatic the sporting events may be. There's very few events that will keep me awake on a Sunday night now, bar the Masters, for example.
What about Red Zone in the NFL? Like, that's something that's kind of like...
No, won't even stay up for the Super Bowl anymore.
Super Bowl's way later. Red Zone's at 6 o'clock. It's perfect, unless you've got
6 in the evening. So that's not a problem. I'm talking once you get past the witching hour of 9 p.m. That's where I really have to start making some very difficult, life-changing decisions. And of all the World Snooker Championships in the last decade, this was the one I should have been watching, because they were 2 of my favourite players, 2 of the all-stagers. I would have far more vivid memories of you, I suggest, of Mark Williams winning the World Championship. I remember vividly Higgins winning his in 98, for the first of his 4 world titles. And for him to come back and 15 years after his last win and pick up a 3rd championship, it's an astonishing story. But I watched 2 frames of the entire 2 weeks.
We just got a message in here from Vincent Dolan, who says it wasn't Paul Brady, it was his brother Philip. Thanks for that, Vincent.
Right, there you go.
So we're like, that would be one of the great stories where, reality TV show come a world champion in handball. But thanks for putting us on the right track.
I made a very big assumption there, seeing P. Brady in brackets Cavan after.
There can only be one P. Brady from Cavan, surely, Dave. Right, we're getting stuck into the relegation battle for the next few minutes. Stoke City were the first side relegated, of course, this year when they went down at the weekend. And Pete Smith of the Stoke Sentinel joined Joe and Kevin Kevin last night to talk about what went wrong this year and why the club were missing these two men in particular.
And there's nobody really we're missing the Irish boys. We're missing Glenn Whelan and John Walters to pull rank and demand order in the changing room. I mean, these players took Stoke up to the glass ceiling. You look at Walters, and he was Stoke DNA personified, really. The hard working, the give it all, the stamina and the character, powerful. But where do you go when you try to replace John Walters to make the step up? Because John Walters is John Walters, and there's no elite version of John Walters without trying to badmouth him. And as a compliment, he is John Walters. Instead, they tried to replace him with someone like Hesse or Maxime Choupo-Moting, who will probably have more flair, and it's come back to bit them on the bum.
Yeah, I get the sense that this is actually a legitimate sentiment in Stoke right now. It's not just a guy who comes on Irish radio and is trying to pander to the Irish audience, that it really seems that these are two guys that Stoke City missed desperately this season.
Well, they missed Glenn Whelan and Jonathan Walters when they were at their Premier League best. I don't think they missed Walters and Whelan this season.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. But
I don't know how much of a difference having either of those in their squad would have made this season, because I think both John and Glenn are past their best, well past their best in terms
that sort
of
of player is what I mean.
That player of that type of character and that standing within a changing room, there probably haven't been enough of those. Now, there have been moments when the likes of Hesse, for example, Choupo-Moting, Shaqiri, have produced some really bright moments in Stoke's season, and over the last 18 months they have, but nowhere near consistently enough to actually be a force in the Premier League. Hesse just disappeared completely, for example. And they are lacking the characters that you need to keep a side up, and there's no question about it. They have sacked Mark Hughes, although their owner saying how they sacked him earlier, that they would have been in a far better position to stay up. But it's not like Paul Lambert has got a decent number of results in the time that he has been there. Certainly nothing in comparison to Darren Moore since he took over at West Brom, for example. But they've just been a really poor team this season, and they are exactly where they deserve to be. They're going to finish bottom of the table. It's a really scandalous place for Stoke to be. And it's a really sad end to their Premier League stint, which is over a decade. And they had some huge moments, getting to cup finals, rattling the likes of Arsenal and Manchester United on a consistent basis at the Britannia Stadium in the wind and the rain and the sleet. They're gone now.
You also worry about their bounce back ability. We had this conversation yesterday that if Southampton were to succumb to relegation, that they have the quality to at least get into the top six in the Championship, whereas it's such a precarious league at the moment. It really is a parachute league almost, if you want it to be. Look at Sunderland. Look how kind of close Villa kind of came to the lower echelons. What was it? They got relegated 2 seasons ago, so their first season in the Championship, they were terrible. Obviously brilliant this year. But you see what I'm trying to say here, that first season of the Championship can be a very, very difficult thing to negotiate unless you've got that sort of know-how, that sort of Walters, that sort of Whelan player, who I think would actually be very, very good, say if Stoke had relegated 3 or 4 years ago, to get them right back up into the top division. Now it's that sort of player you've been mentioning, those players that they brought in, who, without kind of stereotyping against that sort of player, you're not quite sure if they're going to be able to make it in the Championship.
They're not going to be there.
But they're not going to be there, first of all.
There's no way the likes of Shaqiri and Hesse, for example, just to name a couple,
definitely not,
are going to be in the Championship next season. And they don't have those old heads that are going to be able to drag them straight back up again. In Paul Lambert, have they got a manager that's going to inspire them to get back up? Financially, they're going to be in a half-decent place because they do have those parachute payments. But there are a number of clubs in the Championship now that have the financial clout to be able to make a real spurt. And then you get somebody coming from absolutely nowhere, like a Wolves team, who have this injection of finance that puts them way above anybody else and sees them canter away with the Championship in the end. There are big clubs in there. Like if Villa don't get up this season, you would be almost certain they're going to have a really big Championship next season. And they just have to look at the likes of a Blackburn, of a Sunderland, of a Wigan, and see how easy it is to slip down 2 tiers before you can get things on an even keel again. Personally, and from a real selfish point of view, and I'm sure Nathan would back me up on this, I'm not sad to see them relegated at all, because it's just an awful place to go.
Is it really that cold?
It's the coldest place in England.
Is it? Is that a fact?
Factually, I have no idea. But from my own personal experience, it is. Even in May, you go there in May and you want to be able. You need your jacket, your hat, your scarf, and your gloves with you.
And is it the wind that gets you, or is it just the?
Well, it's
chill in the
one
air?
of the highest stadiums in the Premier League in terms of altitude. Altitude is probably too strong a word to use. It's a distance above sea level. I think factually the Hawthorns, who are also which is no longer Premier League ground either. That's actually the ground that ties above sea level in the Premier League. But it's the way the stadium is built on a hill, and there's a gap between the stands, and the wind comes howling between the stands right up into the press box. It's quite a grim place to go, and that is why they've had so many incredible victories over top 4 elite teams over the last 10 years. I don't know if Lambert will lead them, but they need to make some very astute signings, both on and off the field, over the next 2 or 3 months.
So what we're saying here is good riddance, Stoke City. We're delighted you're gone out of the Premier League, and we can't wait to see who replaces you. Hopefully somebody on a lower altitude in the sunnier climes of, I don't know, maybe the Midlands is quite nice.
Well, we've got
Wolves
and Cardiff are the two that we know we will probably be visiting next season. Yeah. And then it remains to be seen who the third one is.
My prediction for next season is that 4 Premier League managers get sacked before the end of November. Because you mentioned the early season changes that might have happened at Stoke and might have saved them. Look at the early season changes that did happen at clubs. Look at Crystal Palace, look at West Ham. They've worked remarkably well. I think next season people are like, well, you know, we may as well just take this gamble. We're going to get relegated, probably.
Well, the Crystal Palace change has worked remarkably well. I certainly wouldn't agree with you that the West Ham change has
got
worked
relegated
remarkably well. They are just about going to stay up. And they have not looked impressive at all. I really don't think that David Moyes' reputation has been enhanced in any way by his time
There was
at
an
West
initial
Ham.
bounce, though.
There was, well, the first 4 games didn't win any of them. Then there was an initial bounce.
Okay,
and then they slid back into really poor sequence of results. And I've seen them a couple of times this season under Moyes, and they've been dreadful.
Yeah.
Now, they have turned in a couple of good performances to get them above that waterline, and they are going to be fine. But the biggest managerial appointment mishap of the season is Alan Pardew. And you either don't sack Tony Pulis and you just give him more time to turn things around, but you do not hire Alan Pardew. And it's incredible that if Darren Moore had arrived a fortnight earlier, West Brom would probably be safe. It's an unbelievable sequence of results. 11 points from 15. They played Liverpool, Manchester United and Tottenham in that time. They have only lost one of those. Have they lose any of those games? I think they have 3 wins and 2 draws. So no defeats in 5. And they almost got to the final weekend of the season. A draw last night at the Liberty, and West Brom would have been alive and kicking going into this weekend. It would have been astonishing. But for me, that's the biggest mistake any club has made, is bringing Pardew in.
Here's the timeline of yesterday. At 5:30 yesterday, Darren Moore was awarded Manager of the Month. At 9:30 p.m. yesterday, he got relegated from the Premier League. This is the first time that's ever happened on the same day. So congratulations and commiserations, Darren Moore.
Very harsh to say he got relegated from the Premier League.
Yeah,
this is not his doing.
I really hope West Brom stick with him, but when you get relegated, if they'd stayed up, obviously they're going to stick with Darren Moore because there's a little bit of a safety there, whereas you've got to get it right straight away in the Championship, and they might just shunt him out for somebody with a bit more experience for the start of the Championship next season. We're going to move on to the GAA now. We're going to talk about Galway versus Mayo. The build-up for this thing is going to be bigger than any match I can remember in May. Maybe Tyrone Donegal in 2013. I'm just trying to rack my brains over the last 10 years. Huge games in May. You'll have covered a lot of them yourself. But surely Galway versus Mayo this year, particularly after the feisty encounter in the league, is kind of going to outdo all other hype we've ever seen in Championship games. We're going to kick off here with Stephen Rochford. He was speaking at the launch of the Connacht Championship last week. He was speaking to Off the Ball's Neil Tracy. Have a look at this.
Given how last season ended, did you have to think long and hard about staying on for another season, or was it a straight decision? You knew you wanted to come back?
Yeah, it probably wasn't as simple as just having got to an All-Ireland final. There was a number of different questions and different aspects of to the season that needed to be addressed. Obviously, backroom team, retirements, what was the squad going to look like, then your own personal situation between family and work, and the commitment levels for everybody is massive. So it was a case of just making sure all those ducks were in a row. So
is it a kind of an analytical process, or is it a gut feeling thing?
No. There is a bit of gut in it, but you have to be listen to your head as much as your heart, and once we were able to weigh up everything, sit down and make sure that we had the support of the county board. It was a case of, let's have another crack.
And even though there's a back door and there's a long summer ahead potentially for a team who loses, it almost has the hype of a straight knockout.
Yeah, there certainly is that feel to it. But I think the there's nobody really looking at what the consequences of a defeat is, nor everybody has the understanding that to win the game only puts you in a Connacht semi-final. So it's not going to define your season one way or the other. But I know our focus is on going about trying to win that game and maintaining a position in the Connacht Championship. And
I imagine you do feel like you owe them any kind of a beating.
Again, I think that's probably a sense of trying to change moments of history. We can't change the 2016 or 2017 results. We can only focus on what's presented here in front of us now, and that's going to be a big challenge. And maybe within some of the guys there'll be a personal motivation element of that out of the last 2 years. But as you look to assess it and get yourself right, it'll be just very much around what the 2018 challenge is.
Yeah, Stephen Rochford there speaking to Off the Ball's Neil Tracy at the Connacht Championship launch there recently. Darragh O'Shea in the Irish Times this morning is saying that Mayo versus Galway this week is being overhyped.
Well, it's the first big game of the Championship, and we have been without Championship football since September, so I don't think you can blame people for really wanting to get stuck into this game. I don't think it's been overhyped because there's a lot of hype around any Mayo-Galway game, regardless of the circumstances. But when you factor in all the ingredients into this particular recipe, the fact that Galway have won the last two, that they had a pretty feisty encounter in the league this season, the fact that Galway have had such a good league and got to a league final and maybe could be the coming force of not just Connacht but football across the country. Kevin Walsh has been taking a couple of swats at the media over the last couple of weeks as well. And then just the whole Mayo situation, coming back for yet another dip into the well. We knew the situation last season when they got knocked out by Galway. They had such a long road to travel, and it was a fairly rocky road, and one which they nearly fell off the road a couple of times. Can you possibly see Mayo go down that route again and have to play 8 or 9 matches in the space of 12 weeks and still have enough in the tank to get themselves back into an All-Ireland quarter-final or an All-Ireland semi-final? So you throw all that in, I think it's unfair to say it's been overhyped. Whoever wins this game is essentially into the last 12. Like, you're one match away from the Super 8s if you get through this game on Sunday, because all due respect to Sligo, I really don't see either of these teams falling to Sligo in a Connacht semi-final. So this game has so much riding on it. It's such a long, bleak road for the loser.
Well, Darragh O'Shea's point is that it actually isn't that much of a long, bleak road. That ultimately everybody who wants to win Sam Maguire, which includes both of these teams, have their eyes on the middle of July, which, in fairness to him, like you all used to talk about August, the bank holiday weekend, that's when you need to peak for. In fairness to him, I mean, everything's been brought forward this year. It's only like a month and a half.
Which makes it even more difficult to do it. Makes it more difficult to negotiate because you have just these games coming thick and fast, particularly for a squad such as Mayo's, for example. They really have 17 players. Like, there is nobody really that you look on the bench and you think these guys are game changers. These guys are going to do what Cormac Costello did, what Bernard Brogan did, what...
But what do you... Like, Cormac Costello, when he changed that game, was there a sense in the league campaign before that? Like, I just genuinely can't remember that league campaign from Cormac Costello where we saw this kid can change a game, because I feel we're basing this all on Mayo's kids, who themselves have to peak later in the Championship.
No, not just Mayo's kids. We're basing it on the fact that they haven't had big impacts from their bench in these All-Ireland finals and semi-finals that they failed to win over the last 6 seasons. When you look at them and you wonder... Dublin had a really strong bench that day, the day Costello came off the bench and kicked 3 points. We forget, because Costello's impact was so great, that Brogan came off the bench and kicked 2 points in that game. So Mayo didn't have either of those two, or the calibre of those two, to come in off the bench. Now, there could be a bolter in the Mayo squad this year that comes in a big moment in a game and does something significant, that maybe, whether it's a Conor O'Shea or a Conor Loftus or an Evan Regan, but we've been talking about those three for each of the last 3 years. Where are these players coming from? Mayo squad, with 1 or 2 big injuries, could just be rocked. And you'd think of the Fermanagh games, the Cork games, the Derry games, the Westmeath games over the last 2 seasons, where they easily could have lost any of those matches. And you wonder for how many years can they keep coming back. You will not get me, though, here saying that if Mayo lose on Sunday, that they won't be getting to the Super 8 or an All-Ireland semi-final. I refuse to write them off, because they've embarrassed me too often over the last few years.
And they've embarrassed me as well. I think they've embarrassed all of us. I think last year was the year we said, straw, Camel's back, Mayo are done, especially if they don't go through the front door, and they proved us all wrong. The one thing I would say, though, just kind of a last point on being devil's advocate in all of this, is when it comes to the Super 8s, you don't have to be perfect through the Super 8s. Like, in previous years, it's like, oh, you go through the back door, you can't put a foot wrong. Granted, if they go through the back door, they can't put a foot wrong, but once you get to the Super 8s, you can afford to lose one game.
Yeah, but you could be in a group with Dublin and another provincial champion.
You would probably be in a group with Dublin if you lose. Yeah,
So-
that is the obvious
There's
caveat.
pretty much and so you would say if the game you're going to lose is the Dublin game, you still have 2 other massive matches. So if you're significantly off the pace, or if you arrive at the Super 8s beaten and weary, and maybe you've lost 2 or 3 of your key operators, and if Mayo lose 2 or 3 of their key men, they're not going to be getting through any group in the Super 8s. They need their best players available, fit, and there's a lot of injury question marks over the likes of Lee Keegan, over the likes of Higgins, over the likes of Cillian O'Connor. Maybe not in terms of their overall fitness now, Keegan aside, but their general fitness profile is questionable.
Yeah.
And if you lose Andy Moran, for example, where do you get the scores from to kick your way to an All-Ireland quarter-final or an All-Ireland semi-final? It's difficult to see from a Mayo point of view. But the one thing you just can't question is the character and their resilience. There can't be a more mentally strong team in the last 25 years of Gaelic football. And if there is a way, they probably will find it. It's just going to be more and more difficult if they don't win on Sunday. If they beat Galway, I think all bets are off when it comes to Mayo.
Yeah.
In terms of them being a force this season.
All bets are always off when it comes to Mayo. They're
But
always off.
in a much more significant way if they win. They're essentially into the last 12 of the championship.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
They're one win away from the
Slide up.
Super 8s. And then they buy themselves a little bit of time. They give themselves time to get Lee Keegan fit. And everything is just mapped out for them then. Whereas Galway coming through the back door, I think, would have a really good chance of battling their way to Croke Park.
Yeah, well, let's hear from the Galway camp now, because their manager Kevin Walsh has also been speaking to Off the Ball Neil Tracy.
It'll be back. I mean, we start the season would have put down 2 competitions, the league and championship. So I mean, what we done was when we came back, it was to close off the league, fully close it off, and maybe take the experiences that would suit us forward. And that's exactly what we've done. So hopefully that's completely apart and we move on.
Is the standard and intensity of Division 1 football, is it kind of ideal preparation for hopefully something like what the Super 8s could be later on in the summer if you get there?
Yeah, albeit I'm sure there's lots of teams that would say they maybe had 8-9 players missing, which they did. And but having said that, you would also be expecting 3 or 4 players to step up, because that's the way it should be. And I suppose in particular, certain teams will probably hit with a lot of injuries. And Mayo were one of the sides, and I'm sure that from what I hear, they're all back now, which is for us, it's a case that they have a lot of fresh legs and lots of experience. So that's probably a tough one for us to take. But
and is it a challenge then to maintain the energy levels after having a very strong league campaign?
Well, look, we'll see. I mean, that's why I'm trying to say that it's our first year in Division 1. It's I suppose compared to the other teams who are 7 or 8 years of experience, we don't have that, and so we're still trying to learn. And maybe we have a long way to go probably to catch up to the intensity of the Mayos in Dublin and how they, the physical side of the field and Division 1. But we're trying to learn understand ourselves, and hopefully we'll just keep improving.
Yeah, Kevin Walsh there speaking to Neil Tracy at the Connacht Football Championship launch recently. He mentions they're trying to look after themselves a little bit more. I think they've cracked that. I think they know how to look after themselves now.
They have a lot of big boys, and they do look like they're one of the most physical teams in the country. Really, we've only seen Mayo in the last 5 years as the only side capable of matching Dublin physically. They can take whatever Dublin throw at them and cope with it and fling it back at them. We need another team that's capable of doing that. Certainly for 45 minutes in the league final, Galway looked like they had Dublin's match, but having Dublin's match in April is one thing. When we saw Kerry have Dublin's match in April last year, and Kerry didn't reach an All-Ireland final last season. So I want to reserve judgment on Galway until they win a big game in Croke Park, which they have not done for 17 years. He was part of the last Galway team that had a big game and a big victory in Croke Park. In the last 2 years, they've got up to Croker in an All-Ireland quarter-final, and I've left feeling so underwhelmed and let down by Galway, because I love watching them. I love their forwards. I love the way they play the game traditionally, although maybe a Kevin Walsh managed Galway team has departed a little from the traditions of Galway in a bid to try and win, which is fair enough, absolutely fair enough. But until they get to Croke Park in the Super 8 and take out a really good side, I don't think they've achieved anything. They need to win another Connacht title. They need to beat a Mayo or a Kerry or a Dublin or a Tyrone in a massive match in Croker.
Yeah. Do you feel they're better equipped to do so? Of course they are.
Yeah, no, definitely they are. And look, it does take an awful lot to go through Division 1 in the manner in which they did, and to run Dublin as close as they did in the league final. But ultimately, they still lost that. We've seen other teams in the last few years, Derry and Roscommon are the two that people always go to, have really good leagues, and when it comes to the other end of the season, they just have nothing left in the tank, and their championship is peter out in a really pathetic way. I don't actually see that happening with Galway. But if they lose on Sunday, and you would think Mayo have just lined Galway up for this match, well, there's going to be some soul searching, and maybe some of the confidence and self-belief that they've taken from the league into the championship will dissipate pretty quickly.
Well, let's hear some more from this game in the build-up to May 3rd. May 13 has just been like the date on everybody's minds since like February. David Clarke was also speaking to Neil Tracy at the Connacht Football Championship launch. Have a look at this.
Yeah, I haven't done too much research into what way the games are actually breaking down, the breaks in between them, but I think a lot of players will tell you can't be playing games. You know, it's enjoyable, less training, more games, and something, you know, in a funny way, enjoyed it last year. Obviously, would like to put some of those games to bed a bit earlier, giving themselves a bit of a break at different stages. But in sport, and just probably like in games, you just roll with what comes in front of you. You know, you got to deal with what comes in front of you and make the best of it. So you know, it's not something I suppose myself personally have looked too far ahead. I'm sure our conditioner from last year hopefully will help us a small bit if we do get that far.
It is a long season as well, and when you start this league, like, it was a very, very tough league campaign for you. Did you get much of a break in April? Did you go back to the clubs? I know there was a lot of talk about it for the last 6 or 8 weeks, how different counties were approaching it. How did it go in Mayo?
Yeah, we went back to the clubs, yeah. I think Mayo was quite good. Actually, after the league, normally we'd have a break and we'd go back with the clubs, and it was no different this year. We played 2 or 3 league matches and a championship game. At the same time, we did do work with Mayo. There was a time frame there where we had to put in a body of work, you know, so it probably was tough going for a number of weeks, but it's enjoyable, as I said earlier on. If you're playing a game every weekend, you know, you got something to focus on, but whether it's club or with the county, sometimes they can be more enjoyable than playing, you know, different types of challenge games, because there is a result that matters at the end of it, and that was something probably that I enjoyed over the last month. In another way, it was probably good for some of our players. We had lads that were out, long-term injuries, you know, that month of probably football week on week probably helped them as well. But I suppose as players, you kind of play what's put in front of you, and you deal what's put in front of you. You don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, David Clarke seems pretty set to play a long summer of football once again, because it's not just about going through the back door this time. It's going to be a long summer of football for whoever plays it. But in actual fact, it's not a long summer of football. No. It's actually a very short summer of football, very compressed. We're going, and I don't want to bring this straight back to TV rights and the games that are going to be on television, but that's essentially where this conversation will go eventually. And we've got, whatever it is, 25 provincial games that don't include finals across the 4 provinces. 3 of them are going to be televised over the next few months. And it's not to do with RTE, it's not to do with Sky Sports. It is to do with the structure that kind of came after the television rights were announced. And we're going to see very little football over the next couple of 6 weeks.
Yeah, I was at the Sky launch yesterday, and it's all over the papers today, and I was given my games about a month ago, and the 3rd game that I'm penciled in for is in the 3rd week in June, or maybe the 4th week in June, a round 3 football qualifier. And I had to double take when I saw it, a round 3 football qualifier in June. And it was only then when you look at the overall schedule and you realise that if you turn your back for a few moments, you're going to miss this championship. There's going to be so much of this championship that we will have no memory of, because there are large swathes of the games that we will not see. There are huge Munster Championship matches in the hurling in Leinster as well that we will never see, bar an 8-minute chunk that you might see on the Sunday game, and 8 minutes is probably being generous. And for me, it's just another example of how, in a lot of ways in Croke Park, they just make it up as they go, because there was surely an opportunity, and if they did approach RT and Sky and ask them about maybe renegotiating the deal, would you be interested in it? Maybe they should tell us if that was the case, but all the murmurings and the perception would be that wasn't the case. And why would Sky and RT, if they only have a restricted number of games, want to be covering an Ulster Championship quarter-final, when that would mean that there'll be one less Super 8 game that they could be covering at the other end of the season? It's a no-brainer. You go for the elite games, you go for the biggest games at the business end of the championship. And for that reason, for example, I'm a huge fan of the Ulster Championship, because I would have grown up watching the Ulster Championship as a kid, and I would have been dragged around every Ulster Championship provincial ground as a child, and we're going to see pretty much none of the Ulster Championship this season. And it's heartbreaking that we're not going to see it. And I just think that they've missed a trick here. Now, whether you need to be bringing in an extra broadcaster, an Air Sport or a TG Cahir, and whether there should be a third tranche of games that maybe the games that Sky and RT don't want can be picked up elsewhere, I don't know. Is there a logistical issue with that in terms of broadcasting facilities and resources? Because there's only so many of those in this country. I'm not quite sure. A lot of those questions I don't have answers to at the moment. But the fact is we are not going to see an awful lot of this year's championship.
Put it this way, imagine if the Champions League decide next season that, you know what, actually we're going to have double the amount of groups. There is going to be, 64 teams in the Champions League. But sorry, the television rights have already been done. So you've got your current package now. We're not giving you any more.
It sounds a bit far-fetched, doesn't it? I would not imagine that we're going to be in this situation in a year's time. I think the GAA in too many ways are reactive rather than proactive. And there's going to be an outcry this season when people realise how little of the championship they're actually going to see in both codes. And an outcry usually leads to a change in tack. And I would see a couple of things in 2019 being a bit different than they were this year. Are RT and Sky Sports open to broadcasting more games? I would have thought they are. I would have thought it might have been possible to do it at a knockdown price this year and then maybe revisit this heading into 2019. But I have a feeling when we look back in the 2018 championship, there's a lot of it that we're not going to be able to remember.
Yeah, it's
and when it comes to picking players of the year, all-star teams,
yeah, that's like,
how can you do it when you haven't seen anybody?
I really envy your job of being on the All-Star selection committee.
Last Sunday night's game should have been on television. There's absolutely no question. That would have got a big viewership, particularly once word started to spread during the game that this could be one of the great historical moments in the provincial championships. Maybe there's an ulterior motive here. Maybe this is the GAA's way of finally getting the provincial councils to relinquish their grip on the championship structure, and we might see the beginnings of the provincial championships just fading away into the background, because if nobody watches them and nobody ever gets to see them, maybe it might be easier to bin them in the next 5 years.
Yeah, perhaps. If you've got any comments on that, by the way, feel free to tweet us at Off The Ball or comment on the YouTube or Facebook stream. You're watching OTB AM, which is brought to you this morning with Air, the home of Air Sport. Get amazing live sporting content free with Air Broadband. We're going to talk rugby in just a moment with Andy Dunne, but to take us there, here's John Walters talking to Keith Andrews at our Burnley FC special for the Keith Andrews Show. You can watch it all back on youtube.com/Off The Ball. Walters here is talking about watching Stoke's demise this season.
I feel for them at the moment. Frustrating watching them.
My take on them is that I've watched us down through the years and played against us obviously a few years before that. They always tried to, in my opinion, replace the likes of you, the likes of Glenn Whelan, and then they always then had to revert back to you, to Glenn Whelan, because they know exactly what they're going to get and they need players like you in the building, whereas the recruitment for a long time now hasn't been at the level that it's at, and it's probably going to cost them this year.
No, look, we felt like that when it was there. It was every year, but I think that's the case. Look, as a club you do well. You always want to make that next step, so you do well. Someone always comes in to take your place and you've got to step up to the mark. And that was the case for many years when I was there. There must have been 8 or 9 strikers coming in during the time I was there, even though I played on the right, probably 90% of the games. So you got to step up to the mark, and that was the case. And at my time, I felt probably wasn't needed as much, and felt like it was time to go at the end of last season. And say recruitment probably hasn't been right. You look at the players that have come in, big players, big wages spent and big expectations, but there's always that worry when you step up to the next level. They might be good players, but they're not at those top clubs for a reason, or they've left those top clubs for a reason. They've got the ability, but have they got the attitude? And as you know yourself, it's not about ability most of the time.
Yeah, great stuff there from John Walters speaking on the Keith Andrews Show there recently. You can watch it all back on our YouTube. And watching that, Dave, I almost feel sorry for them if you didn't already make me hate Stoke City.
I thought it was a very pointed remark from John to Keith. As you know yourself, Keith, it's not always about ability.
It's just a slight little dig. That's what we're all about here on Off The Ball. Andy Dunne, how are things?
Not too bad, thanks.
Sly digs, hopefully we avoid them over the next half an hour or so as we preview this weekend in Bilbao. It's incredible when you get into a Champions Cup final week where you think that the media cycle is just going to be all about the match. And suddenly we have these two huge facets in the media over the last couple of days. The Joey Carbery situation. And yesterday we all kind of breathed a sigh of relief when Stuart Lancaster said, listen, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying at Leinster for the time being. And then after a while you think to yourself, wait a minute, why am I relieved? Of course he's going to stay at Leinster. Why the hell would he go to Harlequins?
He's... I think there's a nice old-fashioned kind of healthy respect about how Stuart operates, in the sense I think he values loyalty. And I think in modern professional sport, when a coach has been through the ringer, like he was vilified. I mean, he had a superb 4 years. He had a bit of a nightmare World Cup, and then in the, unfortunately, as is the way regularly in the English media, he built up, put on a pedestal, and then absolutely tortured in public. I think when Leinster actually made the appointment for Stuart, it wasn't all that well received initially, because people thought, why are they going this route for a guy who's gone, who has been what was perceived to be a failure? And I think Stuart was never, he was massively underrated because of the criticism. And I think he's got a huge loyalty towards Leinster, and he feels a debt to repay them because it's helped rebuild his career and his reputation. But no one has helped rebuild it better than Stuart himself. I think he's backed himself. He's one of the only coaches I've heard from players that they both respect his knowledge and they really like him too. There's very, very rarely you get that combination in coaches. So it's not a feather in a coach's cap to be liked, but it doesn't do any harm. And I think he's respected and liked in equal measure.
For sure, I think it's a great news story all around that he's staying put. And I was just reading Charlie Morgan in the Telegraph yesterday, who's often on the show actually, and he was making the point that Stuart Lancaster is much better when he's not spinning too many plates. Like obviously when he's with the RFU in the England job and handling different sorts of things outside of what he's really good at, which is being a coach. Whereas now he's doing his job. Of course, he's talked about Joey Carbery and may have a hand in day-to-day negotiations because, as you say, the players love him so much. But ultimately, he's back to being what he is best and doing what he does best, and that's the best thing for him. If he gets back to being a negotiator and handling contracts and handling the office job as well as the coaching on-field job, that's when problems might arise for Stuart Lancaster.
Yeah, essentially England manager, wasn't he? When he towards the end of his time as England head coach, he was England manager, and he just never spent enough time in the tracksuit on the training pitch, what he loves, and it's clearly what he's best at.
That seemed to be like an inevitable transition because it's such a big job that I think he was probably selected to be the England head coach initially and became that director of rugby role. And what let him down really in terms of the World Cup was probably the Sam Burgess issue and a few selection issues. It probably really wasn't the content of his coaching in any way. So I know he gave a great interview on News Talk to Joe Malloy about 5-6 months ago, and he spoke about the advice he received from Wayne Bennett, the legendary rugby league coach. And Wayne Bennett advised that in your next job to Stuart, wherever or whatever it is, make sure you 100% want to do it, and whoever is recruiting you 100% wants you, and there's a come and get me plea from both sides. That he felt that was the case in Leinster, and nobody's really looked back.
And it feels, even just looking at his quotes around Carbery, which were in the press yesterday or the day before, I think, it just seems there's a general serenity there. It's like this could become a crisis if there was somebody bad at handling the media or who just isn't as chilled out as Stuart Lancaster is in a good way. Whereas he didn't bat away the questions. He answered them and everything is fine. It doesn't actually matter that one of the prodigious talents of Leinster is being linked with Ulster or maybe even Munster on the week of their biggest game of the season.
But he probably finds the environment here, media-wise, a walk in the park.
I would imagine.
Yeah, true.
It's like,
you think of the torture chamber that he has had to negotiate as England head coach, and the barbs that are constantly been fired at him. It's a much bigger marketplace. It's a far bigger media core, and situations like this are just so handy for him to deal with now, given the experiences that he's been through.
I would have thought, with all due respect to the Irish media and the integrity of journalism, is, it's great, but he was vilified in England. He was hauled over the coals, and it got personal. And it's never been like that in Irish sports media. And I think there's a nice line there, and there's a healthy respect, generally speaking. Obviously, there are times when things get a bit edgy with coaches and the media. It's natural, but I think there's a mutual respect. Stuart has and with the media in terms of. He's generally fielding rugby questions. He's his personal life's not being called into question, or his integrity and all these things. When you've been through it, I would imagine it's quite a lovely environment to be involved in, albeit tricky questions about Joey.
Yeah, like they are tricky questions, and surely there is kind of a mild sense of inconvenience about the timing of it all.
Yeah,
another coach would have said, or another team or franchise in a week like this would have said, look lads, we're building up to a European Cup final here. I only want to talk about Racing. Not Leinster. They're just so relaxed about everything.
Yeah, I to be honest, I'd love to see Joey stay in Leinster. I think it's a great environment for him to learn. And I saw a quote yesterday that said, I think it was actually Ger had said it, that if you look where Johnny Sexton was at Joey's current age, Joey's probably ahead of him, in terms of his development already. And it's noteworthy because Joey is developing, and one of the best ways to learn in any of these sporting environments is actually to learn from your peer group as opposed to learn from the coaching. Obviously you're going to get direction and coaching, but for him to be side by side with Johnny Sexton on a daily basis, he's going to learn by absorbing and just witnessing how Johnny operates in a team environment, and that's hugely impressive.
But has that absorption not already happened to a certain extent now, where he's almost at capacity of the knowledge he can gain from Johnny Sexton, if he's such a quick learner, as people say?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so. I think his position, Ollie Campbell was one of our greatest ever out-halves, and had a kind of a well-known phrase about out-half play. I mean, it's the longest apprenticeship going. You're still learning 9-10 years into it. When you get to kind of the finished article as Johnny Sexton is, that took him a hell of a long time. And let's not forget, had Felipe not got that knee injury in the semi-final in 2009, Johnny Sexton looked like he was probably on his way to Harlequins. And he had played AIL club rugby that year and had a couple of poor games at AIL club level. But to his greatest and kind of eternal credit, when it mattered in the 2009 semi-final, he stepped up, got that difficult kick, banged over the drop goal from the halfway in the final, and never looked back, and showed what mental strength he had. I think Joey would get exposure to greater game time at 10, probably on the back of this tug-of-war alone. I think the Leinster management might reassess the usage of Ross Byrne as much. They might look and say, well, are we actually using Joey in the best possible way, and can we help the Irish squad in a more relevant way in the lead up to the World Cup? I think it's a better option for Joey than going up and playing in the Ulster environment.
Where does that leave Ross Byrne then?
I would say it leaves Ross Byrne in his natural habitat. He's the third best of the three of them, so it doesn't change things for him.
But in the eyes of Lancaster and Leo Cullen, is he the third best of the three of them?
Yeah, well, possibly not. They've picked him ahead of Joey on more occasions than the reverse, but I think and I think Ross has been excellent. I think Ross is a different player to Joey. He's more strategic. I think one of the things that Ross has is essentially a smaller toolkit. He's got 3 or 4 things that he does really well, and he sticks to them. Joey can do about 12 things really well, and sometimes you might get confused on which is the appropriate tool at the right time, and that's something that comes with Joey's natural talent and ability. He can probably unlock defences in 3 or 4 different ways, where Ross might be a bit more settled and play a kicking game, lie deep, or play a distribution game. Joey's got those 2 sides to his game, and he's got his attacking side as well. He has his natural instincts and flair that often you need to curb as a 10. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I think also Johnny is not going to play a huge amount of rugby next year in the lead up to the World Cup, and if Joey or Ross were in a different province and Leinster got one injury and Sexton's in cotton wool, like, where do they go then?
You also need to be careful what you wish for. Clearly Joe Schmidt wants what is very obviously his second choice 10 to have a lot of game time in that position heading into the World Cup. Say, for example, he heads up to Ulster now mid pre-season or after the Australian tour. An Ulster club that potentially won't have their head coach until January.
Yes.
That may not be playing Champions Cup rugby. And they stink the joint out for another season. Joey Carberry arrives into a training camp for the Six Nations or beyond that towards the World Cup with his confidence shot to pieces after a really difficult season whereby maybe a few dubious performances draws the ire of the Ulster support that don't want him there in the first place because he's not one of theirs. He's a Leinster guy who's been thrown up there but they can't produce one of their own. And you end up in June and Joey Carberry's not the second best fly half in the country because all of his belief and his confidence has completely been diluted. That's an outside chance, and I know I'm painting worst case scenario here, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Not at all. And although it sounds bleak, if we were to look at across sports, make it transferable, like show me a Premiership soccer player who goes out on loan and comes back to his original club a better player. It doesn't happen all that much. You know, you see a guy who's on a big money deal or who's at the top of his game in the English Premiership getting shipped out on loan somewhere. It's usually not good news for the player. And you know, I can't think. I'm sure there are examples, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a guy.
Daniel Sturridge perhaps is one of those examples over the last 5-10 years. But as you say, usually you're being loaned out for a reason. Either you're 17 years old or you're 21 and you're not in the first team.
It's not quite worked out for you.
Exactly. Lukaku at West Brom had a great time, but had he been pulling up trees at his parent club, they wouldn't have let him go. And Joey Carberry is not being considered as a potential exit from Leinster because he's playing bad rugby.
No, I think as soon as you get on that, getting farmed out for experience elsewhere, as soon as you're on that merry-go-round, it's a tricky one to get off. It's very hard for him to go in and be commanding in the Ulster role. If he's been assured that, look, we're only going to send you up there for a year, what kind of executive control on the field is he going to have with senior players when they know he's going to leave and go back to Leinster? You know, it's very, very tricky. And
how do Ulster view that then? This guy's only in to better himself and the green jersey. It's nothing really to do with Ulster rugby. How invested is he in this really?
And if you're a head coach and you want a guy who's going to implement what you're, you know, Dan McFarland, if and when he gets to Ulster, is going to have his own views on how the game is played. He may not want a player in the style of Joey Carberry. He may want a guy who's his kind of commander-in-chief on the field, who's an entirely different profile to Joey. So there's so many kind of variables in this situation. I genuinely think he'd be better off for all concerned if he stayed in Leinster.
Well, I dare say it's going to be something that might rumble on for the next couple of weeks and months. We should talk about Bilbao on Saturday. And you look at the season that Leinster have had, the teams they've beaten. I think we've been shocked almost to a certain extent with the ease at which they've won some of these games. And my initial question here is this definitely the toughest game of Leinster's season? Are we sure about that?
I'm not sure, based on the likes of their captain and probably talisman Mashino being out. He's central to how they operate. They're also, you know, battling on all fronts in the sense the top 14 is quite relentless at this time of year, where the Leinster key players are getting a bit more of a rest at the tail end of a tough
Although
season.
we should say that of the 15 that started against Agen last week, none of them started against Munster. So they have been able to rest their players. It's a little bit of a misnomer that they're just being flogged to death this time of the season. They have kept their
They've
best players
depth, and they have the money,
So all of these guys will have had at least 2 weeks off.
Yeah, but I suppose to go back specifically, is it going to be their most difficult game? I don't know on paper, is it going to be their most difficult game? They've beaten the current leaders of the English Premiership, the French top 14, the Pro 14 and the back-to-back European Cup winners all in one season. And like you said, with apparent ease, but I think it is apparent, you know, there's been a huge amount of diligence and attention to detail and work ethic in those performances. I wouldn't be surprised, though Leinster won't want to hear it, but you know, if they get some momentum early in that game, that it ends up facile, if I can risk saying that, European victory. They had one against Ulster in 2012, and I think if they get a good early 30 to 40 minutes, I could see them managing it easily.
Well, they've lost their Sexton. If Leinster went into this game without Johnny Sexton and Maxime Machino was starting, suddenly it's not. I still wouldn't think it's a 50-50 game. Brings us back to the Joey Carberry discussion, but it's a completely different complexion on the build-up. And Leinster do have their Sexton and Racing don't have theirs. And let's face it, Munster still scored 22 points against them, kicked away an awful lot of ball, made some really poor decisions with the ball, fell off a huge number of tackles. Going through the missed tackle stats, I was going through them there. They missed a quarter of their tackles in Bordeaux, 18 in total. Leinster missed 16 against the Scarlets despite having to make 60 more tackles in the game. Leinster are not going to give the likes of Teddy Thomas the leeway that he got against Munster. That just simply will not happen.
It was quite uncharacteristic of Munster as well. I mean, I think we all expected a hugely physical and combative Munster to go out there and try and lay down a marker early on, and I think it was quite a shock for everyone to kind of witness what happened in the first 30 minutes there. For whatever reason, in the mentality and there's been debates about the South African tour, and no one will ever know. You know, we could have 20 of the Munster team sit down in a room and probably give you 20 different reasons. It's hard to bottle and to encapsulate why it went so wrong for that first 30 minutes. But I'd be even more shocked if on the back of that Leinster had a repeat performance in that first 30 minutes. I think Leinster have hit the ground running in most of their games this year. The level of intent in the first 20 minutes in that Scarlets game was fearsome, and indeed it continued before, lead up to half time, straight after. It was relentless. And the other most impressive part of their run in Europe this year has, I think, been they've showed they can win playing different styles of rugby. Like, they've won ugly, they've won physical, they've won playing hard rucking rugby, they've won playing creative rugby running from deep with offloads, they've won with kicking games. Like, they've changed it a lot. They've won with defence
and being on the front foot, coming from behind, all that sort of stuff as well. Like, when you look at this Racing team, the one thing that always comes up as like a buzzword is line out defence. So explain to us how that works for Racing and how that might potentially work against Leinster, because I fear that Leinster have very few weaknesses, but is potentially Racing's strength one of Leinster's weaknesses?
I'm not sure if it's a Leinster weakness, but I think there's a familiarity there, and I think, again, Munster kind of crawled up their own backside a bit with the Dunne-Ryan issue, so there's always going to be an awareness. There's a familiarity there, obviously, with Dunne's history in Munster. He goes into the opposing squad, and there's an element of, you get so complex, the walls start to close in and teams are trying to second guess each other. Munster did an early line out with Scannell thrown to the front that looked to me really like they'd psyched themselves out. Dunne knows our calls. Billy Holland is on record saying, look, you can't fundamentally change the calls because it's a complex system. So they did tweak a few things. But essentially, the line-out is best and most functional when your timing is right. It's not so much the strategy in the call. The strategy in the call is giving your own players direction on where the ball's going, and the opposition defence can read it. You can do intelligence and counter-intelligence to the nth degree. But if your timing is right and you're getting up in the air first, the throw is on the money, the lift is good, the footwork is good, you're going to win 95% of your line-outs regardless.
Knowing where the ball is going is one thing. Actually stealing the line-outs is another.
Stopping it is the other. I think Nakarawa and Ryan are obviously very, very good line-out operators, but Leinster absolutely have got a strength there. I'd imagine they'll probably stick with Fardy again. You've got Ryan, you've Toner. I mean, there's three serious operators.
Even use Levy as a line-out option this season. They can keep them guessing.
Yeah, I think it's a very important part of the game, but it's probably going to, I suppose, dilute its importance if Leinster's execution is good, and if they don't fall into the trap of, who knows what, intelligence, counter-intelligence, analysis, all that type of stuff of each other, you can kind of crawl up your own backside a bit. You got to back your process, back your ability to do it under pressure, and ultimately I think they will do that.
So it seems the very thing that I've been reading about Racing in terms of their biggest strength is not actually going to have that much of an impact against Leinster. So
you're asking a fly half how he thinks the line-out's going to go.
I was a great line-out technician. I was a serious line-out technician in my day.
What do they target then? What is there to target about Leinster? I fear there is nothing. Not that I fear for Racing in any way, but if I was in their shoes.
Hugely difficult. I mean, when I looked at Ireland, during the early parts of the Six Nations, we were playing a certain brand of rugby that I felt if you were able to match us physically, which no one actually was able to do, but if you were able to match us physically, what was our alternative route to success? That was a concern of mine in the early stages of the Six Nations, because we were playing a very definitive physical brand that, once matched physically, can be stopped. If you're trying to counter the current Leinster squad by just matching them physically, they'll run around you, or they'll offload better, or they'll attack space through attacking kicks. Sexton, probably 3 or 4 kicks in the opposition half, like really smart, really aggressive tactically, quite brave to kick possession away. They have multiple ways to win. It's probably the reason I'm not a coach, because I can't think of a way I would attack them. So the two Laurents, Labie and Travers there in Racing, I can't imagine they're going to sit down and identify 3 key weaknesses there. I think they've just got to accept there are very few weaknesses. They've got to look for an exceptional performance from within their own group, as opposed to hand-picking 3 or 4 holes in the Leinster setup, because I don't think they're going to find any.
If it gets to the final quarter and it's still in the balance, you can really only see one winner. They were out on their feet against Munster and Bordeaux in the heat in Bordeaux. There was lads not even making rucks, let alone being ineffective at rucks. They started to miss some tackles. The defensive shape started to go a bit awry. It was just Munster didn't have the creativity within their backline to actually expose that. Leinster have at least 3 distributors in their backline, in Johnny Sexton, Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose, 4 if you throw Easton Matheu in there. Absolutely. And then James Lowe, who can play the ball out for the back of the hand and do anything in a given moment. They don't have any weaknesses under the high ball, with Rob Kearney being there, and they have their first choice scrum half back fit, and you just wonder, it's very difficult to see them having any joy that they got against Munster in this game against Leinster, because all the holes that you can pick in the Munster performance, not only would you not associate those types of holes with Leinster, but Leinster have had 3 weeks to look at it and make sure they don't fall foul of the same issues that Munster had. For example, 2 of the tries led from the ball being whipped out wide by Racing, and just one step inside took 3 Munster defenders out of it, because they were so keen to avoid being beaten by Tama on the outside, that once you come back in, there's the entire midfield is there, and Vakatawa is in midfield, and we know what he can do. So I just don't see any of the major Munster issues being replicated on Saturday.
No,
are we talking ourselves into a really disconcerting level of overconfidence?
No, I don't. I think it's justified. Like I think there's there's been a change in Irish rugby in the last couple of years where we're okay being favourites. I think we were okay going into the Six Nations. We were comfortable going to Twickenham. We were the favourites, and we carried that with relative ease, and we were by far the most convincing team on the day. It's a very non-Irish approach to sport. I think typically our successes have been in pockets, when we're underrated and we're the underdogs, and when historically we've been put on a pedestal, we've cracked and we haven't carried the mantle of favourites with confidence. I think this Leinster group, they both carry it with a sense of comfort that they're okay being favourites, but they have something probably not has been addressed all that much, and they've got an incredible sense of hunger. It's really tangible in that group. There's a lot of guys there who are young guys looking at a Leinster looked like a dynasty at one stage with 3 Heineken Cups. You've got a middle of the road crew in terms of age profile who came at the tail end of those last successes and haven't won their own medals. And then you've got the older gang and the likes of Sexton, who are putting it up to the young crew and going, are we a champion team or not? And in the likes of James Ryan, Dan Levy, Luke McGrath, Ringrose, there's a huge hunger in those guys to say we belong up here, and we belong being one of these guys who's got a star on the jersey. And that is, to me, one of the defining aspects of this Leinster squad. Apart from all the talent and strategy and great coaching we've talked about, there's just a hunger in their play, and the great barometer of that is like your defensive work and your line speed and your ability to win a breaking ball on the ground. There's a pack of wolves mentality about their group that I think probably isn't there in a kind of a...
You used the word already. Relentless is the best way to describe the way this Leinster team go about their business.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's there in that Racing group, albeit it's a pretty well put together squad with a lot of depth.
What do you do at 10 if you're one of the Laurents? Are you going with Dan Carter now that Machino's not there, or are you going to put your faith in Lambie to conduct the game? Because in French rugby, the emphasis is so much more on the scrum half.
Yes,
We've seen the great French halfbacks over the last 20 years have been scrum halves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard to come up with a great French 10. You got these mercurial guys like Cambrabero and Michalak, who's actually retiring in this weekend. But it is going to have to be on the 10 this weekend. So do you go with the World Cup winner, who's 34 and way past his best, the 35, or do you go with Lambie?
Even if Machino was fit, I still would have picked Carter. I think it's a no-brainer going into the game. I think the guy, albeit he's beyond his greatest moments, he's absolutely got the capacity to turn up for European Cup final. He's going to give the group probably a sense of calm and a sense of purpose, because he's comfortable in the environment, and even if he changes tack midway through European Cup final, people are going to follow him. It is one of the greatest traits of French rugby over the years, that the general on field is their 9 and generally a place kicker, and the guy who's in to replace Machino also is a place kicker. I would have gone with Carter for the final regardless. I think Lambie is kind of, he did very little in the Munster game to affect the actual victory. He didn't have a huge imprint on the game. It was more out wide. It was their, from 12 out that they really did their damage, and in the back row. And I think he was a facilitator and just got the ball out to those channels. European Cup final to me is a no-brainer. I would start Carter.
Just one other element of this when it comes to the coaching element, and it's not just Cullen, it is Travers as well, who are going to be whichever team wins, they'll become the first player and head coach to actually win the European Cup in both those positions. And I just find it so ironic that Leo Cullen could be the first person to have this individual accolade, because the reason he will win with Leinster on Saturday is because of any lack of individualism, any lack of ego is the reason why Leinster have been so successful to collaborate with Stuart Lancaster, and that has manifested itself in what you were talking about a few minutes ago, about this unbelievable squad mentality that whoever has a jersey will fight for the team, and there isn't really any selfishness there. So there's an irony there, isn't there?
Well, I think teams always reflect the personality of their coaches. Whether coaches try to avoid that or not, it just comes out in the group. And it's so plainly obvious that Leo and Stuart there's no power battle between them. There's no ego. It's a huge mark of Leo's leadership skills that he sought out a guy like Stuart Lancaster to come in. When Leo had a tricky first year, a lot of coaches would tighten up, back themselves, get a team around them with possibly less experience, and say, I'm the guy who's in charge and I'm going to do it my way and my way only. Leo went the other direction and had the sense of awareness that if he got a guy he had the foresight as well and awareness to say, we get a guy like Lancaster involved, and we work together on this, the sum of our parts will be greater. And it's a hugely impressive thing to do as a young coach. I think it's taken pressure off Leo. It's allowed him do what he does best. He's well known to be a cerebral type of guy. He's not all that, boot biting bollock and emotion. He's going to be analytical. He's going to be technical. He's got a clearly defined role, I think, within the forwards and how he coaches them. And then he's obviously got a very, very defined selectorial role. And I think he does have the final say. But I think the mutual respect working between the two of them is it's great to see. And it's, like you said, it's ironic that he could be the first guy to do it. And to do it with the kind of level of humility that he's done it, it's a lovely thing to see in the game.
It's an 11-point spread on Saturday. Will Leinster cover it?
I think they will.
Not even asking if they're going to win. After the
they'll hate these predictions, but I could see them covering that spread, yeah.
What do you reckon?
I'm uncomfortable with the question, are Leinster going to beat the spread? Not are Leinster going to be European champions come Saturday evening. I think there's a chance this will be a landslide, but it's a final, and that old cliche, anything can happen in a final. The best team usually wins these finals, and I think Leinster are the best team, and for that reason they are going to win the game. But whether it's by 11 plus is a different story. I do feel that in the last quarter this Racing team are going to be out on their feet. And Leinster may well get some big scores in that last quarter, but I have a feeling that the game may be done before we get there.
Well, good to see the Irish inferiority complex alive and well this morning. Andy Dunne, thanks a million, appreciate it. We're going to chat Gaelic football in just a moment. We're going to be chatting to some of the Leitrim camp after their famous win against New York on Sunday. But first we're going to chat a little bit of golf, and here's Tiger Woods. He had some pretty interesting things to say about LeBron James and the nature of greatness just yesterday.
First of all, I think that being great is doing something that no one can do, but also what separates those people, the ones you mentioned, like LeBron, or like what I'm thinking of with MJ or Gretzky, it's just the duration. They're able to do it not just for 1 year, or not just for one game, or not just for a little spell, is that they're able to do it for a number of years and accumulates highlights that we will always look at, and they're peppered in our memories. And to dominate something is one thing. Every player out here can have one good week, and blow away the field. Okay, great. Now, can you do it for a month? Can you do it for a year? Now, do it for a decade. Do it for a decade plus. And then they start separating what is truly great. And in our sport, there's been a few guys who've had runs where they've lasted for well over a decade, into two, and that's what separates greatness. And what LeBron has done for 15 seasons now, it's just remarkable, because it's that type of longevity, and to be able to be up for that long a period of time, and to be able to adjust as well, because we all know as we age that we're not going to be as athletic as we used to be, and so you have to do it different ways, and to be fluid and adjust and still be that talented and that good. And hats off to not just LeBron, but a lot of the players, the people I just named.
Yeah, greatness, recognising greatness there ahead of the Players' Championship this weekend. Another interesting line ahead of the Players' Championship was Jordan Spieth over the past 24 hours or so. It's printed in the newspapers this morning, saying that he wants the Players' Championship to become the 5th major, which is nothing new, but he said a little bit more beyond that.
Well, it's nothing new in that there's always talk of could the Players' Championship become the 5th major, but to have somebody of speed standing in the game actually saying it, that is a little bit new. I can't recall too many players over the years that are in the top 5, multiple major champions, that have been talking about bringing this 5th major thing into play. But some of the stuff he said is bizarre. Like, he says the calibre of the field, says it's the strongest in golf. It has that extra vibe, that aura the other 4 majors possess. Just the way guys talk about this place, it's different. And then he says, even if I became the 6th player to complete the Grand Slam, my resume in my eyes would still feel a bit empty without a player's title. Now, for me, that's absolute crap. I just can't understand how someone like Jordan Spieth would feel that way. I don't believe it, for a start. I think he's just plumossing the audience that he just happens to be sitting in front of in this given week in the season. But we just saw clips of Tiger Woods there. He's won 14 majors. He's won 2 Players' Championships. If I offer Tiger Woods 16 majors and 0 Players' Championships, would he feel there's been a gap in his resume? Absolutely not.
It's the 5th major.
Rory McIlroy hasn't won the Players' Championship. Do you think he lies awake at night wondering why he hasn't won at Sawgrass? Absolutely no chance. Pádraig Harrington hasn't won the Players. He's got 3 majors. Does he care about not having won the Players' Championship?
He'd swap all 3 of those majors for 1 Players' Championship day.
It's absolute bullshit from Jordan Spieth. I couldn't believe it, actually seeing it written down, because for a start, I don't think the course is up to being worthy of staging a major championship year in, year out. It is not Augusta National, which is the only course in the world that gets to stage a major on an annual basis. Yes, you've got 17 and all that goes with that and the history of it, but it's a quirky place to play. It's been heavily criticised by many of the top players over the years. I do not think the really top pros would want to be going to Sawgrass year in, year out. They've had major issues with the greens over the years, major issues with the weather, and for Spieth, who's a 3-time major champion, on the cusp of winning the Grand Slam, to talk about this being introduced as the 5th major, I think is off the wall. And just don't believe him. I actually do not believe him.
We might see Under Armour replaced with the Players' Championship as Jordan Spieth sponsor over the next couple of days. We'll park that there because we are talking to the Leitrim boys next. They have officially arrived back on Irish soil. But before we chat to them, here's a reminder of the drama in Gaelic Park on Sunday evening, courtesy of Willie Hegarty on Shannonside Radio.
The chance! Leitrim are coming third! It's just a moment! A goal for Leitrim! It's blocked! The sides are level! The sides are level! Shane Quinn has put the ball over the bar and we're all square at 1:15 to Asian points and we have 14 seconds to play. 1:15 to Asian points. The sides are level and we go to Park Sean. Referees indicating there's 1 minute. Is there a winner? Is there a loser in Gaelic Park? Who's going to win the kick-out? Who has the confidence? A long one out to the centre. Breaking ball. Leitrim haven't won back. Can Leitrim win it by a point? On the 50-yard line. They're coming. McGovern has it. Inside to the substitute. This could win it for Leitrim. It's kicked in. Leitrim leads. Leitrim have taken the lead in Gaelic Park in New York.
Yeah, Donny Rinn, Michael McWeeny and Brendan Gallagher have landed back in Dublin, and I'm delighted to say they join us on the line. Good morning, lads. Welcome home. So talk to us about Sunday evening. I'd imagine it was an unbelievable day, an unbelievable night, and just the atmosphere, as we could clearly hear there from Willie Hegarty on Shannonside Radio, is like nothing else you'll hear in the Championship. You can take what you want in August or September, but that'll go down as one of the highlights of the summer immediately. Did it feel like that when you were in the middle of that cauldron? You seem to have a...
yeah, it was a crazy one, really, like...
The Wi-Fi there is clearly giving us some sort of New York connection still, as if they're using their data and absolutely killing all their bank account by using that data. But I'm sure they are still in the country. We can guarantee you that. We'll get them back up maybe on the landline or on a mobile phone in just a moment. But yeah, that will go, as I said to them, that will go down as one of the key moments of the summer, as something we might actually forget because of the amount of water to come under the bridge over the next couple of months. But like, if you play that in September, you're still like, bloody hell, that was special.
Yeah.
I miss May.
Well, I remember in 2016, throughout the Championship summer, thinking, do you know Roscommon's game at New York in the first round is probably still the best provincial championship match we've had in this year's campaign. And I think in 6 weeks' time, it could well be the case that this was the best one. You just had to listen to Willie Hegarty there. I don't know how much of his commentary you heard on Sunday night, but I listened to pretty much all the game on Shannonside. And he's a unique man in the commentary box. At one stage, when there was a little bit of a break in the game, he said, there are 2 dogs up behind me in the stand here having a game of their own, but I'm not sure if they know the score. But he does bring a very different way of doing things commentary-wise, and he was at his brilliant best on Sunday night because the game was able to bring it out of him. And the significance of this win for Leitrim football is absolutely enormous. You lose that game, you're a history maker for all the wrong reasons. And I'm sure that was in their minds when they're 3 down with 5 minutes to go in that second period in extra time.
Donny, Michael, Brendan, I understand we've re-established connection. How are things now?
We're good.
So whereabouts in the world are you? You've landed in Dublin, and I presume you're en route back to Leitrim. I know a few of you are based in Dublin, though.
Yeah, I mean, the 3 of us are actually based in Dublin, so we're just in the airport, just after collecting our bags there. Oh, good stuff. Talk to us about the drama of the last couple of days. I make it 2.5 great nights in New York after that game. We did a little bit of celebrating afterwards. Fair adrenaline rush after the game, so we had some really enjoyable nights there with a huge Leitrim support that had come over. I think we're actually very grateful to them. There's like 1,500 Leitrim people there, which is like huge for a county with a population of just over 30,000. Almost 5% of the county there. It was massive for us. It was good to be able to celebrate with them afterwards.
It's an unbelievable thing for them as well, because obviously every county appreciates their own supporters, but for a lot of these people it's the trip of a lifetime. They're making up for lost time with friends who are living over in the United States, so I presume they're a real part of this and a real part of the celebrations after you get the win on Sunday evening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a number of people that I met there that I had never met before, but I was connected to in some other way, whether it was relations or neighbours or or whatever. I mean, it was just unbelievable, really. And it was really great that we got to enjoy two good nights with them. And it was brilliant as well that we all kind of stuck together. I know when you're abroad, sometimes you like to get away from your own, but no, I think it was really good that we got to enjoy two brilliant nights with a load of Leitrim fans that have come over and ones that were already over there.
Donny, it's Dave here. After the game, Emlyn Mulligan said Leitrim needed the win more than New York. How damaging a defeat do you think it would have been for the perception of Leitrim football and the motivation within the squad to keep going, motivation from children in the county to one day aspire to play for Leitrim if you're part of the first team in Connacht Championship history to actually lose to New York? Is this? It just feels like a really significant victory.
Yeah. I think probably in the game itself, that was probably one of the things that maybe held us back a bit, was the fear of losing. I mean, it probably would have been detrimental to our progress. And I mean, a lot of the current squad would have found it difficult to go back again. You know, having that tag of being the first team to go down to New York, it would have been a real confidence burster, you know. But thankfully, we just got it together. I mean, we even talking to some of the guys, after, they thought we were gone, at times. We were 3 down with 4 minutes to go, just to get it back is unbelievable, and then for Noel to kick the winner. I think it, saved our bacon, but I don't know if we realised the significance of that score.
Is that going through your mind when you're 3 points down? Is that the main thing motivating you, that you might become the first county to lose to this New York side?
I don't know if you can say that. I mean, you still have to just play the game that's in front of you. Yeah, no, I wouldn't say that. That's all that's going through your mind. I mean, you just have to keep your focus and try and play the game that's there in front of you. And I probably would say that maybe the lads that were still on the field, they kind of put that to the back of their mind and just got on with the job, rather than I honestly believe that was probably holding us back a bit. And we probably hadn't played as well on Sunday as they had been in our preparation. But I suppose there's a lot of factors that kind of take into consideration when they're over in New York, and both lads aren't getting proper sleep, and that you just a bit of jet lag, and it's a lot more humid over there, so you kind of have to take those things into consideration. But I think maybe as well as those, there was a fear of losing that might have held us back a little bit. Thankfully, we got over that.
When you're in the middle of a match like that, because it is going to go down as one of the most incredible games of the summer, no matter what happens over the next couple of months, do you realise how incredible a game it is? Because it's quite easy for us at home, listening to Willie Hegarty and Shannon's side, to get really into it. I presume the Bronx was rocking for those last half an hour or so at Gaelic Park on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, you don't realise it at all. Well, you do in the latter stages when the crowd are going crazy. But as the game's progressing, you don't realise, all you're thinking about is trying to get over the line, especially with New York. We were just eager just to get ahead of them and try and hold the lead. But I don't know if at the time you probably don't realise the significance of it. And the way it ended up, the way it finished, yeah, I think most people would have been like, wow, what just happened there?
You've just landed, Donny, so I know it's probably too early to really be focusing on what's going to be happening in the next few weeks, but at some stage you do have to dust yourselves down and get back to the reality that it's Roscommon you're taking on the next round of the Connacht Championship. And the last 4 games in particular against them have been very one-sided, most notably that game last season when you were beaten by 17 points. So now that you have New York out of the way, it is still just New York, arguably the worst team in the All-Ireland Championship. How do you guys come up with the belief now, given your recent history against Roscommon, that you can't trouble them, that you can be competitive against them, and you can arrest that slide that there has kind of been there against Roscommon going back to 2011?
Yeah, I mean, could say it's a difficult one. I mean, they're, I suppose, a Division 1 team or a Division 4 team. But, I mean, we had a discussion among ourselves yesterday, and even throughout the weekend, we've come a lot closer as a group, whether it was through this trip or just through our preparations for the trip. we've come on a lot as a group, and I think even our preparations for the New York game, we felt we were moving really well, but as I said, when we got over there, we probably struggled to show our best form. So look, we feel we're coming back here with a bit of form behind us, and fair enough, people are going to look and say, "Oh, you only got New York by a point after extra time." But I mean, you look at Roscommon over there 2 years ago; they only got them by a point as well. So I mean, look, we're going to believe in ourselves that day when we go against Roscommon in 2.5 weeks. Excuse me, but it's just a matter for us now. It's just getting our preparation in and getting lads back down to earth after the New York trip, and just getting ourselves together for 2 important weeks of training.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a sense that it's a bigger win than just beating New York, because first of all, it's arguably the best team we've ever seen New York put out in the championship. And also when you look at the age profile of your team, I mean, you were born something like 3 or 4 months before Leitrim last won a Connacht title. So I guess you've never understood what it's like to be on a Leitrim team that's been the best in Connacht. But at the same time, you've got John O'Mahony in your ranks at the moment. And I'd like to know how important he's been in terms of painting a picture of Leitrim as not being the guys who are going to get whipped by Galway or Mayo, but a county who can stand up and be the kings of Connacht potentially in the future.
Yeah, I mean, John, he's obviously a key part of our management team, but we also have Seamus Quinn there, who's an all-star back in '94. From last one, Connacht, and our manager Brendan Gustin was part of that team as well. John, he's an upbeat, positive guy, and he just kind of wants to get the best out of us, and he tries to get us to see the potential that's within the squad. And last year he probably struggled to get that out of us, but I think in the last couple of months, you mightn't think it from some of our league results, our early league results. But the last couple of months, we've kind of hit a run of form, and John's message is kind of just start to just realise the potential that's within the group. I mean, fair enough, we mightn't have much success at underage level, but we feel that there's kind of a group of players that have come through that are better prepared, better conditioned, better tactically aware than maybe what had been coming through in previous years. And John is just trying to get us to realise the potential within that group. He's doing a pretty good job.
What is the dynamic there between Brendan Gutkian and John O'Mahony? Because it seems to be in vogue at the moment almost for there to be some joined up thinking in the GAA. It doesn't go well for some counties, but it's clearly going well for you guys. It's obviously going well with the likes of Poacher and Walsh in Galway. So what is that dynamic between Gutkian and O'Mahony like?
Yeah, I mean, look, Brendan probably does most of the talking, but it's fairly obvious they're bouncing ideas off each other the whole time. I mean, we still have Seamus Quinn and Michael Wilder part of the backroom team as well. So, look, between the four of them, they're always bouncing ideas off each other. And look, in fairness, they give the players, they let the players kind of take ownership of a lot of what we do and a lot of the tactical stuff we do and how we kind of approach our games. And I think that works pretty well for us. Or it had them in the latter stages maybe of the league and in our championship preparations, as I was saying. Just I suppose letting us kind of decide how we're going about it, and then they kind of build a plan around that.
So there seems to be a trust within the players group, despite the fact that it is quite a young players group.
Yeah, it is. But I mean, we're probably fortunate enough to have some very strong leaders in the likes of them, and Brendan Gallagher and Neil McQueen here beside me. So when you have guys like those kind of guiding, I suppose, a younger generation, it really helps the thing a lot.
Yeah, just a final point then, as Dave mentioned, it is Roscommon on May 26th. You've mentioned there that the three of you are all based in Dublin. How does that work coming up to a big championship game? Do you have to travel west to get in training, or is it kind of like a Mayo situation where you're meeting each other halfway to accommodate the lads based in Dublin?
A bit of both, to be honest. I suppose a lot of us kind of have to make arrangements with work and stuff to get out in time to get down. If we have to get down to Leitrim, I mean, it's probably with traffic and all, it could take you up to 3 hours some evening. But yeah, closer to maybe championship games, we generally tend to try and meet kind of halfway, just to even out, share out the load and make sure everyone's good and fresh coming into championship day.
Yeah, for sure. Well, best of luck with those preparations. Best of luck against Roscommon. I hope it goes well. And congratulations on Sunday once again.
Okay, thanks very much, guys.
Donald Rinn there, the Leitrim captain. He was also joined there by Brendan Gallagher and Michael McQueenie, but unfortunately our Skype connection let us down on this occasion. I'm sure we'll chat to them though after they hammer Roscommon.
Yeah, they have to go all the way back to the last decade for their last taste of victory over Roscommon, and you do feel Roscommon are one of the coming teams under Max Day and McHale. They are the Connacht champions. They are a Division 1 team. It's a big ask. It's hard to see them being competitive against Roscommon, which I think is what you would take if you're a Leitrim supporter right now, for them just to be in the game, because they haven't been. And I was at the game last season when they got hockeyed by Roscommon. It was never in the balance, really. And that's really all you're looking for.
It is a huge thing, though, to come off a trip abroad where you've got this huge amount of emotion with 5% of the population there, that there is a cause now. It's like we're on the road. We've got a tiny bit of momentum that, like, I would be very surprised if Roscommon were to get beaten in this next game, because I actually feel Roscommon are dark horses to win the Connacht Championship, as I would say a lot of people feel that way. But like, if this game, I presume it's not on TV because there's no provincial football before the finals on TV. If it would be on TV, it's a game I'm watching. I'm very interested in this Leitrim team now. I'm very interested in how they might set up with a lot of young heads in there, along with the likes of the old dogs like Emlyn Mulligan and that team, how they might approach this Roscommon team with all the pressure on Roscommon. I mean, it would be the story of the summer if Leitrim take down Roscommon, but I'm not saying it's going to be the most outlandish possibility here.
No, stranger things have happened in sport than Leitrim beating Roscommon in the next round of the championship, but if Leitrim have a cause, if they have this swell of momentum on the back of this game, that's an irrelevance to Roscommon.
And it's at the Hyde, I guess.
And it is at the Hyde. But look, the point you're making there about this potentially being the story of the summer, this is why this game should have been on TV at the weekend. If this game had been on Air Sport or TG Caher, for example, there would have been an awful lot of build-up. They would have got in behind the stories of these Leitrim guys that have to travel from Dublin. How often do they do it? How many debutants have Leitrim had in the championship in the last 10 years? Who are these New York guys? What sort of a Leitrim diaspora is there in the New York area? How many of these 1,500 fans are going to be following Leitrim throughout this year's championship? Like there's an awful lot of potential for the backstories and the side stories that were around this fixture, and it was pretty much all ignored. And it's going to be forgotten about until we see New York in next year's championship.
You should go to New York yourself and make a documentary.
If Off the Ball are willing to, pay for the plane ticket, maybe I might do. But it was just such a missed opportunity, and it's another indication of how, when it comes down to it, no one who really cares about Leitrim and their presence in the championship.
Nobody cares about Leitrim.
No one cares about Sligo, the fact that they beat London, and they avoided.
People from Leitrim and Sligo care desperately about that. So I kind of cared about Leitrim beating New York the weekend. I would have been very interested had New York won that game, and
we were glued to the wireless, listening to the game to see how it went.
Yeah.
But in the corridors of power, look, you're in this championship because it's history and tradition and structural history means that you're still in this championship. But look, would you just go and get yourselves knocked out as early as possible so that we can actually focus on the big dogs, the people that bring in the big money, the people that are going to fill Croke Park? Because ultimately, Sligo and Leitrim both made their bows in the championship of the weekend, and those with influence and those that really have the power to change things didn't give two hoots about the fact that they were in it, because we saw or heard nothing of it.
It's actually in Clarke and Shannon, Roscommon Leitrim. Because I think the home away agreement was with New York, that will be in the Hyde, because obviously New York would have had to go to Ireland. So yeah, it is in Carrick and Shannon. Does that change your thinking at all?
No, I was in Carrick 2 years ago when they hammered them.
You're really killing my dreams here, Dave. I want this Leitrim journey to continue.
I'd love to see a Leitrim Championship Odyssey as much as you would. One of the big stories from last year.
Actually, Dave, I think you're just being a cloud of doom on this whole Leitrim story.
I just feel they should have been given far more. And not just Leitrim, New York as well. And I'm including Sligo and London in this. They should have been good. Last weekend was the first weekend of the championship. Whether or not you've got a Galway Mayo type fixture to kick the championship off, there should be far more than just lip service paid to it. And I would love to see Leitrim be the Carlow of this year's championship, because they were one of the stories of 2017. People still talk about it. And look at how they followed it up. They've got promotion from Division 4 for the first time since the mid-80s. So Leitrim are going to lose to Roscommon, and they're probably going to lose in the first round of the qualifiers, and there won't be many tears shed over the fact that Leitrim are no longer part of the championship. My point is that there should be, and there should be far more significance given to these types of games, instead of just getting it out of the way in the first week in May so we can all move on and get on with our lives.
Well, if you are from Leitrim and watching this morning, I promise you we will play that clip right now when they do win their first round qualifier and get through to round 2 of the qualifiers. Dave, thank you very much for everything this morning. It's been a pleasure. Off the Ball is back on the radio as always tonight from 7 o'clock. It is Wednesday night rugby, the football show, and much more until 10 o'clock. We are back as always from 7:45 a.m. tomorrow. Ger will be back in the hot seat, so we'll chat to you then. Good luck.
OTB AM.
In association with Air. Get Air Sport free with Air Broadband.